You're listening to the Morphology Podcast. Thanks for tuning in to the Morphology Podcast, aka Murph here, to share interviews about biking experiences from cyclists who have pedaled to places all over. Each week we will get to know new people and explore new destinations to ride your bike. As you listen to these adventures, you may wonder, why haven't I done that yet? This week we are connecting nature enthusiasts with cyclists. For the last 5 or so years, the gang at Milkweed Matters have set up booths on RAGBRAI. They make seed balls made of dirt, clay, and of course seeds, and hand them out to cyclists, who then toss them into appropriate places along the route. You may already know that the milkweed plant is the only plant monarchs lay their eggs on. Well, I caught up with founder and chair of the board, Kelly, to talk about how Milkweed Matters came to be and what exactly they do for pollinators. Well, on the show this week, we have Kelly from Milkweed Matters. Hi, Kelly. How are you doing?
Hi, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Good. So Kelly is the founder and chair of the board for Milkweed Matters. And for anybody who is out and about outside, especially on bike trails, you may know what milkweed is. And if you've been part of RAGBRAI in the past, you've probably seen the Milkweed Matters gang handing out seed balls. And I can tell you right now, Kelly, I still have my little fabric bag with your logo on it that I used every day on my bike. I would find your booth and I would load up with the seed pods or seed balls. And then we'll get into what happens, but you'd throw them out along the trail with hopes that they would turn into beautiful plants for butterflies.
That's wonderful. I'm glad the bag has survived all these years.
Yeah. And hopefully, RAGBRAI exists again in the future as we know it so that I can do it again.
Right.
Yeah. Well, why don't we start out by giving us a little bit of history on how Milkweed Matters came to be?
Sure. Yeah. So we've been going now for about 7 years, which is wild to think about. But in 2014, so I'm not originally from the Midwest. I'm from Southeast Louisiana, but had moved to Iowa for work, and just didn't know anything about the state or the landscape, and thought, well, what can I do? What can I be involved in to really immerse myself in these communities, which seemed so wonderful from the start. And so, pretty immediately heard about RAGBRAI. And I, to be honest, I wasn't a big biker before going on RAGBRAI. It was more like, well, here's just this fascinating, sociological study of thousands of people, doing a collective effort. So I signed up. So that was 2014, and I recruited my friend and roommate at the time to ride with me. And we're both, just kind of hobbyist on the side, really into nature and going on hikes and camping and whatnot. And so we wanted to do something else while we rode. We brainstormed all these ideas of like raising money while we rode, or getting our family to contribute $1 for each mile or whatever, all kinds of different things. And we landed on this whole Johnny Appleseed idea. Since kind of being in Iowa, I had learned all about the tallgrass prairie system. It was new to me, and was just fascinated by the subtle beauty of prairies and how they require fire, and just everything about them was fascinating to me. And so kind of along those lines, the monarch butterfly was sort of just getting in the news. And 2013, 14 was when the monarch butterfly population just declined by, a ridiculous amount. And so all the newspapers were covering this decline of that population. And so there was this clear need for, here's like a really, a species that everybody knows about, or that they're hearing about these days. And so maybe there's a way we can plant some seeds for the monarchs. So yeah, important to know is that milkweed is the sole host plant for the monarch butterfly.
Mm-hmm.
What can we do while we ride to help this particular butterfly? Well, let's toss some milkweed seed just as we ride into the roadsides. So that's long-winded kind of backstory to say in 2014, the two of us kind of, we made it a whole thing. We brought a bunch of loose butterfly milkweed seed, which is the short orange bloom milkweed that folks will recognize. And we made some wings that we wore. We had some T-shirts that we, did some puff paint on. And it was like real grassroots and just, out of our living room kind of effort. But that year, it was just so amazing how many people were interested in like, hey, what are you doing? What are you tossing into the roadside? Is that trash? Tell us about the wings. And so just immediately we saw, we've got something here. There's a need and there's interest.
And I will definitely say, I don't know if it was that first year that you guys did this, but being on RAGBRAI and hearing about milkweed and the seed pods and the fact that monarchs depend on it, that's when I found that out, was during RAGBRAI. And I came back, after RAGBRAI, and I'm like, is this really true? Like, how can a butterfly really just need one specific plant leaf to, like, really? And I did. I researched it and then realized, oh my gosh, times have changed. We need to do something.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there's so much, that we forget from like second grade biology or whenever you learn about those basic connections in nature. I mean, many species and especially many butterflies and bees have this really special connection and requirement for a particular plant. So with the monarch, the female adult lays all her thousands and thousands of eggs on milkweed leaves only. During her lifetime, she's only looking for that one plant. That said, there's a really important need for other nectar plants. So they feed on all kinds of plants, all kinds of flowers with different sources of nectar. But as far as the breeding process, laying all the eggs, that is only done on milkweed.
And I did learn after that first RAGBRAI what a milkweed plant looks like. And I was on a bike ride with some other friends, and I'm like, I don't think there are any milkweed plants along this bike trail. And it was in the Des Moines area, and I had a friend who knows what they look like. And so once we found one, then I realized they were everywhere. So I don't know if that is, from people planting or if they just grow naturally or how that all works. But it was mind-blowing that they existed, and I just didn't know what they look like.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, that's a major objective of Milkweed Matters, is just increasing that awareness of like what exists in Iowa and elsewhere. And as you're saying, what is missing from those really key, pieces of land.
Right. So when you look specifically into the entity called Milkweed Matters, what exactly does your group do?
Yeah, so all the work is started way before the RAGBRAI ride or the bike ride, whatever ride we're doing. We hold seedball rolling events. Let's focus on Iowa since we're chatting about RAGBRAI. So the work of Milkweed Matters actually starts way before the actual bike ride, where we toss these seeds into the roadside. In Iowa specifically, we have educational seed ball rolling events in local communities all over the state. And those are with all kinds of audiences, all ages. We would have seed ball rolling events with elementary schools or scout troops, church groups. We've done some corporate events. Even had some volunteers go to the Anamosa prison.
Oh, wow.
And those, apparently that was just such a successful event. We've partnered with Meskwaki tribe, lots of city-based schools and different organizations to kind of, reach youth that live in urban areas, and don't, might not otherwise have lots of natural interactions. At these events, we bring buckets of a mix of clay and soil that, we just dig from the ground, and ideally like areas close to where the event is being held. So we'll bring all this mud and some seeds. And after we have a little chat about, here's what the Monarchs about, here's what milkweed is about, here's a little bit about these population declines, here's why, pollinators are struggling. But hey, here's something very easy and quick you can do right now to help. And so after that little brief, education, we all get our hands dirty and we show everybody how to roll these seed balls. And so, it's just you literally take a little clump of the clay and soil, roll it together in a little ball, maybe cherry tomato size, and then, poke a little hole where you're going to put around 4 or so seeds. You roll it back up so it's enclosed, and then we set them to the side to dry.
Nice. I attended one of these
awesome.
seed ball making events. It was at like a public library in a real small town, and I went with my local bike club, and we had a blast. And these particular seed pods ended up having multiple seeds for multiple different flowers, including milkweed. We got to take home little bags full and, throw them in appropriate places. And I have not checked to see if my little seeds turned into anything, but gosh, it was fun.
Yeah, well, that's awesome. I'm glad. It's really, I don't know, exciting when someone participates in kind of the whole range of activities that we do. Roll some seed balls and then rides on the ride and sees, the excitement of tossing them into the roadsides. So that's great.
Yeah. Well, is the actual mission of your group, is it specifically to grow milkweed, or is it specifically to help butterflies, or is it all connected into one?
Yeah, I mean, so, officially the mission is to increase pollinator habitat in roadsides. Okay. So, over the years, we sort of, quickly recognized the need to support and emphasize all pollinators and all of the habitat that they require. There are many organizations that have kind of their champion, their icon species as the monarch, because it's the one that people know about and recognize and draws them in. But then you can easily, make so many other connections to other pollinators. There are plenty of other butterflies in Iowa even that are struggling more, that have even less habitat than the monarch, and that in some ways are better pollinators. So the monarch is sort of this flagship species that brings people in. It's the gateway pollinator, if you will. When seeds are available for other native plants, those are great to grow in roadsides and in gardens and whatnot. And they're going to benefit many, many species.
And do you mentioned you're from Louisiana, or at least you live there, and you're now in Iowa. Do you have more than one location of where your organization works or operates out of?
Yeah. So, actually, I've in the past year or so, I've moved back to Louisiana.
Oh, okay.
But we've got a really strong leadership team in Iowa, and so, historically and primarily, definitely based in Iowa. Really because RAGBRAI and just the industry standard for like large scale bike rides. They've written the rule book on how to make it work.
Right.
And so, that's definitely the start and definitely kind of the biggest audience. That said, we've got some really key volunteers that live on the western side of Iowa, and so have held many events in right over on the Nebraska border. So we've kind of engaged Nebraska folks in these conversations, and there's very similar conservation issues going on there. I also lived in Madison, Wisconsin for a year and a half or so, and while I was there, made lots of connections there. And we've got a small group of volunteers in Green Lake, Wisconsin, that they have a bike ride around Green Lake. They made some seed balls and tossed them, and so that was sort of our first Wisconsin event.
Excellent.
Still trying to figure out how to expand it here in the South. There are different issues and considerations and pollinators which are of interest. So, if and when Milkweed Matters as an organization continues to expand, the focus issue, the focus species might shift depending on what's there and what the needs are.
Sure. Well, most of the people listening are cyclists, and so I want to make the connection with cyclists. You said how you create these seed balls, and then cyclists are supposed to throw them while they're cycling. Like, give us an idea of how that works as far as connecting cyclists to your organization.
Yeah, well, I think that's the magic of the organization is, we're bridging these worlds with nature enthusiasts, people that care about pollinators, conservationists, with bike riders of all kinds, and sometimes those two worlds overlap, but often they might not, depending on what kind of cyclist they are or what kind of, who knows. But so we're bringing together these two sometimes disparate worlds. And I love biking because it is a way for me to slow down and really, especially when I like to do long distance rides, and, where I can at some point along the ride, like, not focus so much on the challenge of the biking itself, but sort of like zone out and,
sure.
And be a little more present and mindful with, like, my surroundings. So I absolutely experienced that riding through fields and the crops of Iowa. And even, here in Louisiana, I ride on the Mississippi River Levee Trail. In both situations, it's, I'm just riding and my eye naturally goes to the ground right to the left of me or to the right of me, not necessarily to, like, the wide expanse of, the horizon, but I start to notice, as you said, oh, right there's a milkweed plant. I recognize it now.
Yep.
I see it. And then you start to see it everywhere. Or, if you do the same route over and over, you start to see the bird nest that appears in the spring, or, you start to really know this land that's right next to the road. To me, like biking allows for that awareness of the environment. And so, you start to notice then when there's a lot of trash, or when, there were just beautiful blooming native flowers, and then the next time you go ride that same route, it's all mowed down. Or, it's brown and crusty from being sprayed with a pesticide or whatever, and so it sort of facilitates this care for the route and makes those connections.
And I think that totally is a good segue into my next question, because, we talked about how, people can make seed balls, go to an event and they have them, but now figuring out where to throw them or where not to throw them because of exactly what you just said. Like if a field's being mowed, if the side of the trail's being sprayed with chemical, obviously if there's a farm field, you don't want to be throwing milkweed into a farm field because they're focused on crops. So how does that work?
It can, it's easy on one hand, and on the other hand, it can be complicated. So what we tell people during RAGBRAI, during those routes are, to look for spots that are not sprayed or mowed.
Mm-hmm.
And so, we've got pictures and some educational things at the booths each day of the ride where, we let people know what to look for. The idea being that if it's not currently sprayed or mowed, then maybe, that spot is well maintained. The landowner is considerate of these things. Over some conversations and research that's put out by lots of colleagues, technically we should be throwing the seed balls where there's not going to be any competition by other plants.
Oh,
and
sure.
So technically we should throw them where it's mowed so that it's only the seed ball that is there and it's much more likely to sprout. But you get into this sort of catch-22 of, well, if we throw it there and they just are always mowing, then that plant, even if it comes up, it won't survive.
Right.
So there's not really an ideal solution. Mm-hmm. But the best that we can do is tell riders to toss them where they see other native things growing. Mm-hmm. So they're sort of among their friends. We know that's a spot where that soil is good. There's probably not, there's good drainage for native plants to grow. Look for the space where their friends are.
Mm-hmm. And then what's the cycle after a cyclist throws the seed ball into wherever, they decide to throw it? How long before it becomes a plant?
Yeah, well, that's also a frustrating part for a lot of people because sometimes it can take 3 to 4 years.
Oh, wow.
Before you can really, see this beautiful prairie that we have in our minds. So the benefit of using this medium of the seed ball to distribute the seeds is that the clay and soil surrounding the seed, first of all, protects the seed itself from, a bird eating it or the wind just blowing it, onto the asphalt or whatever. It sort of packages the seed. The weight of the seed ball means you can really lob it to exactly where you want it to fall. Mm-hmm. The seed ball, we toss it in the late summer / fall, and it's really just going to sit there all during the winter. Mm-hmm. And so many tallgrass prairie plants have to go through a process that's called cold moist stratification. And that just means it's cold and wet, covered by snow for several months. And that process is kind of just prepping the seed so that in the spring, when the snow melts and the clay and soil of the seed ball has disintegrated, the seed itself is just prime to sprout.
Excellent.
That sprouting, though, first is going to happen below ground. Year 1 and maybe even year 2, most of the growth of that plant is in the roots. And you're not going to see much above ground action. And so, a lot of people, even in your personal garden, you might think, well, nothing's working. It's, this seed is a dud. But there's so much happening below ground. And so it's not until year 2 that you'll start to get the little seedlings above ground. And then if everything's gone well up until that point, year 3 or 4, you'll get this huge sprout, this shoot is what it's called. Mm-hmm. And then some blooms, and then, it'll spread from there. But yeah, it's patience.
Yeah.
The whole process is patience. And there's so many factors that can go wrong along the way. And
Right.
So, that is why it's quantity. Yes, we want quality of seed and, we want the right things in the right spots. And we want just so much of it.
Right.
Because there are so many ways that the plants could be diseased or mowed or sprayed, so the more we have of it, just the more probability that some of it's going to be healthy to support these pollinator populations.
Mm-hmm. So then that even makes it more exciting that you are partnered up with RAGBRAI, because a typical day is 10,000 plus cyclists who will cross the state. Can you tell us a little bit about the RAGBRAI Milkweed Matters connection? Like, were you getting a lot of participation, and were riders, was it just, I hope it wasn't just me coming to fill up my little canvas bag every day.
Not at all. Pretty much every year I'm hoarse by the end of the week.
Yeah.
Talking to thousands and thousands of riders. Just for some numbers here, I mentioned that the first year, 2014, we brought sort of loose seeds. The next year we realized that the loose seeds weren't working, so introduced this idea of seed balls. Seed balls aren't a new, we didn't invent seed balls. Kind of was introduced widespread by a Japanese natural farmer called Fukuoka. That's his last name. And so, just sort of borrowed that idea. But anyway, 2015, we partnered with this organization called Monarchs in Eastern Iowa. That's just an amazing group of folks on that side of the state that care about pollinators and habitat. And so we rolled 2,000 seed balls. We had one booth that year and ran out of the seed balls by 9 a.m.
Oh, my.
So, there was a huge interest. The following year, we had 24 events across the whole state, rolled 50,000 seed balls, and we had a booth every day of that ride. Monarchs in Eastern Iowa was also huge and helping to implement that year. With that success in 2017, we really upped the ante, and this was kind of our peak year. We had 80 events across the state, rolled over 60,000 seed balls.
Wow.
And we, again, gave out every single one during the ride. We track how many people stop by each booth, and it was, at least 2,000 a day. And as you're saying, many come back. Folks stop by every single day to refill their bag.
Yeah.
And they bring their friends and they tell, word got out, you should stop at this really cool booth. It's really fun. Or, even just sort of a riding promotion for the booth that, just as people are riding and they're tossing their seed balls, even if a person riding next to them has no idea what we're about, they ask that person, hey, what'd you just toss?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And so then they tell them about the booth, and the next day that other person stops. And, it's just, we kind of created this whole community of people that cared about the roadside habitat, which is amazing.
Yeah. And it's such a easy connection, because most people who, at least people who wear jerseys, those little canvas bags fit perfect in a bicycle jersey. So, because it does take a tiny bit of talent to figure out how to throw a ball while you're pedaling,
Right.
I'm sure there are people who pull over and then, toss the seed ball exactly where they want it to go. But, I'd reach back and grab one out of my jersey pocket and just give it a toss when I would see, like you mentioned, an appropriate place to throw it. But I would definitely say if there was anybody around me when I did it, there was always somebody who would ask, like, what are you doing?
Nice. Yeah.
So, yeah, I just think it's such a great connection. And you mentioned you were doing, I think you said 80 events, but so are you doing events other than RAGBRAI in years past?
Well, so those 80 events, were the seed ball rolling events across the state
Okay.
prior. So, just this really important point that, there's so many kind of measures of our success that you could look at that, we're getting this many thousands of seeds on the ground and we're touching this many people, just thousands of local Iowans and those communities who drive by these roadsides every day or whatever, in addition to all the people that come to RAGBRAI, not from Iowa most of the time. So it's really engaging all these different kinds of people, as well as planting the actual seeds.
Listeners will probably be thinking the same thing I'm thinking, but now with the whole age of COVID, that definitely changes things. I'm sure everybody knows that, RAGBRAI couldn't happen. Do you have a sense of the future for Milkweed Matters at this point, or are you still trying to work through it?
Yeah, I wish I knew more.
Yeah.
Our leadership team in Iowa and Wisconsin, we met when the rides were canceled in April or whatever. And obviously for the safety of everyone involved, we just sort of ceased all activity for this year. We normally start these community seedball rolling events as early as January, February, and we could very well still be in the same situation where we're limiting gatherings.
Right.
And your hands are dirty while you're in these gatherings. And so that, the ability to like cover a sneeze or something,
Right.
the whole setup is a little difficult to figure out how we can still operate. So, that said, I think our leadership team is just so creative and so passionate about education and engagement about pollinator habitat. And so, I have no doubt that we, whether or not it's through, the name of Milkweed Matters, they've got their own even just side organizations and, connections. We've kind of established this network now, and it's just a common activity with kids or whoever, like, hey, let's roll some seed balls. And just that idea of seed balls and the idea of thinking about roadsides as habitat has really just taken off. I think we've set the stage as an organization to kind of spread these ideas, even if, we are not, ethically able to move forward.
Right.
There's still an impact either way.
Right. Well, I think now's a good time. If someone listening wants to know more about Milkweed Matters, where can they go to find out more?
Yeah, we have a website, milkweedmatters.org. And, we update it as we can. There's not much to update these days, but we also have a Facebook presence of the same name and an Instagram account. So yeah, I would say, any kind of change in our efforts or, updates on future events would go through those platforms.
Excellent.
I'd love to mention just a couple of the other organizations that, our leadership team is involved with.
Yeah.
So I mentioned before the Monarchs in Eastern Iowa organization, that their largest presence is in a Facebook group. So you can join the group, and they've got a blog website with lots of different stuff, and they do a lot of outreach events and whatnot. Our Western Iowa lead started this organization called Monarch Habitat Initiative, and they actually published a book geared towards kids that, we didn't even get into kind of the amazing migration of the monarch butterfly, and that's not really our mission at Milkweed Matters to think about the Mexican connection, but of course all those monarch butterflies overwinter in south central Mexico. And so, myself and others on the leadership team, we've visited those reserves down in Mexico. And there's a lot of, it's a whole other conversation, but there's a lot of important degradation happening to that habitat, those forest habitats, like logging and other things that are kind of hurting the small little communities that live on those tourism dollars and things like that. So anyway,
yeah.
So that the kids book that I mentioned is kind of produced in partnership with another nonprofit that's located in Mexico at one of those preserves. And their name is Butterflies and Their People. And so they're doing amazing work working with those local communities that, take tourists up to view the butterflies every year. They implemented this ranger program to pay local citizens to go and look out for people trying to destroy the forest and things like that. So, there's just so many people thinking about this one species, from Canada to the U.S. to Mexico. There's a lot of collaborative efforts to help with that.
I am very intrigued with the story of butterflies and how they travel to Mexico, and it's like every other generation kind of, if I remember right, like it's a pretty interesting cycle.
The fifth or so generation is the one that migrates 2,000 miles or so down to Mexico.
Wow.
So I mean that's kind of what, like, if there's a thing that really got me into monarchs specifically, it was just the magic of their migration. This like intergenerational communication that happens. So generation 1 through 4 just live about a month and have, reproduce and die, and that's about it. And then come the 5th generation, they just somehow know that they are the generation that needs to turn around and go back south and go all the way to the same exact forest in Mexico where their great grandparents were.
Right.
And it happens every year without fail.
Wow.
And I am so amazed by it.
Yeah, that's very, very interesting. Yeah. Well, how about you? You mentioned briefly that, this whole thing started because you saw this bike ride called RAGBRAI that you joined in. But do you still bike now that you're back in Louisiana? A quick interruption to tell you this week's sponsor is Thirsty Pigs, a full-service mobile event company offering beer, wine, spirits, plus catering for any indoor or outdoor event. Check out more at thirstypigs.com. Now back to the show.
Yeah, I as often as I can, I go on that Mississippi River levee trail. I live about 2 blocks from the river, and so I can easily hop on that trail and ride 20 miles or so upriver from New Orleans to Baton Rouge.
Nice.
And it's just beautiful. And there's a really cool ride it's called From NOLA to Angola, which is the name of a prison here. And so they ride maybe 60 or more miles, and it's sort of all in the name of supporting the families of incarcerated folks.
Oh, okay.
So they raise money along the way. And I mean, I guess maybe there's a theme of like, I like to ride, not just for myself.
Sure.
I like to do sort of combine missions. So, rides like that really intrigue me. Riding for my own physical and mental wellness. And if I can, help out some other cause, that's a great double win.
Yeah. Full circle back. Milkweed Matters is definitely a great organization that you founded, but also just helps so many different entities as far as the butterfly and pollinators in general.
Yeah. I really hope so.
Yeah. Well, Kelly, thank you so much for being on the podcast and sharing your story. And I think everyone listening is hopeful that we'll get back to group rides and maybe see your group out on a ride someday soon.
Definitely. Looking forward to it.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, listeners, that's it for this week. A big thanks to Kelly for taking the time to talk about Milkweed Matters, Monarchs, and the connection with cyclists. The children's book she mentioned is called Saving the Monarchs by Nancy Scott and Nancy Cruz, and you can find more information about them on their Facebook page called Monarch Habitat Initiative. Milkweedmatters.org also contains a lot of good information about milkweed, about monarchs, as well as other pollinators. You can find other interviews with cyclists on the Morphology Podcast through any of your podcast platforms, or go to morphologypodcast.com. For now, I leave you with this quote from the Unwritten Book of Morphology. This quote comes from Maya Angelou. "We delight in the beauty of the butterfly, but rarely admit the changes it has gone through to achieve that beauty." Think about it.